Hey, Kathryn, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. I'm in that, well, we're recording this right now in that gap between Christmas and New Year where no one knows like what day it is, what time it is. We're kind of in this vortex of like, I don't know what's going on anymore. So yeah, I just feel like I've eaten a lot of cheese and and I think it's a Monday.
Think so. Yes, Monday, December 30th that we're recording this. And yeah, I'm so happy to have you back on the show. This is our third episode together, and we wanted to really talk about going into the new year. Right now we're in this vortex, like you said, but soon there's going to be this push to, become a new version of yourself, right? We're entering 2025 and it's time to get serious about our goals. And, that's what's marketed out in our culture. So we don't want you to get involved in any dieting traps, in any restriction, unsustainable resolution. So, we really wanted to talk today about starting the new year in a healthier way.
Absolutely. And the people selling a lot of these approaches that they get traction all year round, but the new year and kind of January is like their open day. They really hit it hard with their marketing and they come at you pretty hard around January. And they know that we're all just coming off the back of the holidays and the pressure around New Year to feel better. And I was actually having a conversation with a client this morning where she was talking about a part of her really feeling like she wanted to draw some really hard lines in the sand and be like, okay, no more like ice cream. Like I got to get the diet sorted. I'm exercising every morning as of tomorrow, and these very, very rigid, hard lines. And the people selling these ideas, they know that. They know that we're in this space right now, so they try and speak to that desire. But what we know about sustainability and setting yourself up for a really good year and a successful long term is that that's not the way to create sustainable change. If we do hit everything really hard right out of the gate, falling for that, I just want to get off to a really good start, and all that kind of mindset, we're going to be burnt out by March.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Or even before that, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
by January 5th or something like that.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's this idea of new year, new you, right? That you're just going to flip a switch and become this completely new version of yourself. But we know that, whatever habits and whatever patterns you had in 2024, they're going to carry over into 2025. And not that you have to act on them or repeat habitual destructive behaviors, but those same brain patterns and pathways are still going to be there. And you have to change them in that, like you said, a gradual, sustainable way and not just, oh, I'm just going to set these hard lines and become this new me right out the gate because you're really fundamentally the same person on January 1st that you were on December 31st.
Yeah, absolutely. The same pain points, the same struggles, the same things are all there, both internally and externally. So if saying literally or almost literally every single Monday for the entire length of 2024, okay, this is the week when I'm going to sort it out. If doing that every Monday hasn't worked, there's nothing different about trying to do that on New Year. It's the same thing, but just with fireworks. Like it's not going to create a different situation. So if we wanted a different outcome, as tempting as it might be to go, all right, this is the year, this is what I'm going to do. This is like cool, cool. We can do some stuff differently, but let's not try to do things differently in the same way we've tried to do things differently every year for living memory.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the way you said that because we're not saying it's wrong to do things to help yourself move forward toward goals that you have, goals that are sustainable, goals that are healthy. Of course, like we want you to be a healthy, happy version of yourself, but we don't want you to get there in a way that's actually destructive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of conversations around this space, like you and I have mentioned before, they can be very dogmatic in saying, maybe preaching some pretty uh how do I want to say it, ambitious goals in terms of things like body positivity and all this kind of stuff. And as much as all those things are helpful to understand, and even the health at every size movement and whatever, it's all so complex. And it can give us the impression that we're saying you shouldn't want to improve yourself, you shouldn't want to do anything different. Like, it's accept yourself just the way you are always and forever. And like, yes, self-acceptance is a really helpful pathway to change because it lowers the emotional charge of our overall experience and therefore makes it easier to make choices more congruent with better health. But yeah, absolutely right. We're not saying that the idea of wanting to create some changes is inherently bad. It all depends on where that desire is coming from and how we go about it.
Yeah, and like you said, it is a complex topic because body positivity is ultimately a good thing, right? To accept
Mm-hmm.
ourselves as we are. But
Yep.
sometimes, and I'm not sure exactly the way to say this, but sometimes accepting ourselves as we are, like we don't want to accept destructive habits that have gotten us to a place that we don't even feel like we're as we are. I mean, when I was binging and really overeating to an extreme and feeling so awful about myself, I don't think that was me. Like that was the destructive habit in my brain. That was this primitive drive that was causing me to do all these terrible behaviors, and just sitting back and accepting that and like, oh, this is just who I am and what I do, and I'm just going to be fine with it. And I had a lot of extra weight from the binging. Just accepting that didn't feel right to me. So, accepting that realistic version of yourself, right? Accepting, we want you to accept, your genetic makeup and what's realistic for your own body, but you don't have to accept destructive behaviors, or you don't have to accept yourself when you're showing up as a version of you that doesn't even feel like you, if that's making sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The idea of acceptance is something that I struggled with a lot in my own journey with food and particularly body image. And I found it really helpful to create some clarifications with acceptance in my own mind and say, like, okay, I'm going to accept myself as I am right now in this moment, because as I am right now in this moment is already here. Trying to fight what I am right now in this moment creates a whole lot of angst and resentment and shame and guilt and everything like that. So I can accept that right now, meeting myself where I'm at, this is exactly where I'm at right now. I can practice some acceptance with that. It's no use fighting what already is. But that doesn't mean that that acceptance implies that this is what I'm going to need to accept as my permanent state forever.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And people who are in a state right now where, like I talked about, they don't really feel like it's that version of themselves that they're comfortable with, because of destructive habits, because of behaviors that have, led them in the wrong direction. It's, yeah, like looking back and having compassion for yourself for that. Like there were factors that led me to this. I can be compassionate toward myself. I can care for myself. I can understand how I got here and I can accept that. Yet I know I don't want to carry that forward, into 2025 and the rest of my life.
Mm, absolutely.
So then how do we go about, and how do you help people go about making some of those sustainable, healthy changes that don't slip into that obsessive dieting mindset?
A really helpful place to start is shifting the focus from what's going on the outside to our mindset and how we're thinking about things in a very constructive way. So, an example of a very self-limiting mindset could be, like we mentioned, trying to draw very, very hard, clear lines in the sand around certain foods, for example. I'm never going to eat this again, or I'm only going to eat this for 1 hour every Sunday, or, like, and that kind of stuff is a very slippery slope. I'm only going to eat these foods. I'm never going to eat these foods. Much more helpful to create a mindset shift where we go, okay, I'm not going to take any action that is rooted in a cognitive distortion. And what I mean by that, like well-known cognitive distortions that are associated with binge eating, for example, black and white thinking is one of them, that all or nothing thinking pattern. So I'm going to choose to not take action based on a train of thought or an impulse that is fundamentally rooted in all or nothing thinking. Like I didn't eat what I was planning to for lunch, therefore I'm going to write off the rest of the day and start fresh tomorrow. That's an example of black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking as a cognitive distortion creeping into our behavior. So, very unhelpful to say, I'm never going to eat ice cream again, or I'm going to stop eating sugar forever. We kind of know how that goes long term. Much more helpful to say, as far as mindset is concerned, I'm not going to take any action that's based in all or nothing thinking. Another example of a cognitive distortion is catastrophizing, constantly thinking of worst case scenarios. I'm not going to take any action that's based on the fear that I get around my mind producing this never ending stream of worst case scenarios. I'm going to work on my ability to build awareness around things like catastrophizing. So, from a mindset perspective, we can make adjustments there rather than fixating on things like, you know, how many biscuits am I eating?
Yeah, that's really interesting to look at the mindset as the thing you need to work on rather than the specific food behaviors. And when you work on your mindset, the specific food behaviors kind of naturally change.
Yeah, absolutely. One path feels like we're restricting ourselves, the other path feels, let's just say, different.
Yeah, it feels like you're making choices that are based on who you are. And kind of what I talked about earlier was that we can get into these behaviors where we don't even feel like we're operating from our true self or operating from that primitive place, like you said, from those cognitive distortions. So you want to step back into your higher self, right? The part of you that knows what decisions are best for you and not in a rigid, restrictive way.
Absolutely. From a very practical perspective, I know that there's going to be a lot of noise around exercise and
Mhm.
movement around January. I can share a couple of things, very, very actionable things about that, if that's
That'd be
helpful.
great. Yes, absolutely.
So, something to keep in mind is that we can't rely on getting hyped up in order to exercise, in order to get to the gym. I see this happening in a lot of like group exercise type classes, a lot of forms of exercise. There might be a well-intentioned trainer or group exercise instructor or someone there getting everyone really excited and really pumping everyone up. It's not to say that it's bad to do that, but that is really an unsustainable way to approach daily movement if we are relying on being really amped up and especially if that's in the name of leaving it all on the field and training really hard every single time we exercise. Again, if you've tried to do that in the past and couldn't stick to it, that's not a reflection on you. That's just physiology. Like we're not going to be able to sustain that emotionally. We're not going to be able to sustain that physically. So we want to look at movement and exercise and training or exercising in such a way that when we finish some exercise or some movement, it's good to have a little bit of energy left in the tank.
Mhm.
So rather than thinking, okay, did I work out as hard as I can and really give it all today? It's much more helpful to go, okay, did I enjoy myself? Did I practice a few new skills? Did I focus on the way I was moving? Did I challenge myself while still feeling like I can walk out of the gym or leave this exercise session standing on my own 2 feet rather than being carried out on a stretcher? Leave some in the tank for tomorrow because the goal is always to show up tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. Don't feel like you got to leave everything on the table every time you go into the gym.
That's some great advice to give to people heading into the new year because there is more of that. Okay, now it's time to push yourself. It's time to, sadly, there's a lot of talk of burning off the calories from
Yeah,
the Christmas and all that, and we all know that's not a healthy way to approach exercise, right? It's about feeling better and becoming that healthy, realistic version of ourselves. It's not about burning calories. It's not about punishing ourselves. And I really love that idea that you talked about of leaving some in the tank, right? Because the reason we're exercising is to be able to feel good in the rest of our life and to do the things that are really important to us. See people just really killing themselves in the gym and basically just laying on the couch the rest of the day or barely able to walk, and it's just, or how are you living at that point, right?
Yeah. Oh, you just remind me. I spent so many years feeling, for lack of a better way to put it, just emotionally fragile after the effort that I was
Mhm.
putting into the gym. I'd have like a triple espresso and an energy drink or something like that and do these crazy sessions. And for the rest of the day, I was just kind of strung out and tired and grumpy or emotionally fragile or whatever. I wasn't able to focus at work, all in
Yeah,
the name of trying to leave it all on the table when I was exercising. And yeah, exactly like you said, we're doing this to feel good in the rest of our lives,
I know.
right?
Yeah, and I think there's some mindset shifts that need to happen there because some people, it's like the exercise becomes the goal of the day in and of itself. Like if you feel
Yeah.
like you've accomplished that, then I did it, my day is complete. And I think it's really helpful to shift to some other goals in your life and to really look at what else is important to you and what you want to save your energy for and how you want to show up in your job, with your family, with your friends, with whatever else you're trying to accomplish during the day.
And the irony here is that doing this will actually produce a better outcome in terms of fitness anyway.
Mhm.
Like it's easy sometimes, like the previous version of myself would have heard this and being like, oh yeah, you're just telling me to be kinder to myself. Cool. But winners aren't kind to themselves. Like all that kind of, that really hard, like, I'm not going to say work ethic. It used to call itself work ethic, but it wasn't work ethic. It was just, thinly masked self-hatred, insecurity, whatever it was. That part of me would reject these ideas because I was so focused on the outcome. But the reality is that doing exactly what you just said and training, exercising, eating in a way that's a bit smarter, that's a bit more focused on the long term, brings into focus the fact that mental health is a reality, that we have emotions. It's just going to produce a better outcome all day long.
Yeah. And all lifetime long too, right? Like it's just not sustainable. We both experience that of really pushing ourselves, and it leads to burnout, it leads to injury, it leads to eating disorders, it leads to binging, it leads to all these terrible outcomes. So yeah, we're not saying just give up on exercise. We're saying, hey, if you approach it with a different mindset and more of a self-caring mindset and more of a mindset when you're also taking into account the rest of your day and keeping your energy up, you actually get better results, and not in a, purely aesthetic way, but like just feeling better overall, becoming that healthy, realistic version of yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and something else I want to talk about that's related to this is we've been talking about goals in terms of food and fitness, and that's a lot of times where the focus is in the new year. But I think it's so important to realize that health and mental health encompasses so much more than that. And I think to avoid getting stuck in these food and fitness traps, it's helpful to expand our goals and really try to work on some other things that are ultimately aimed at health as well, but don't involve anything to do with our food or fitness.
Yeah. It makes me think of a friend of mine who I was hanging out with a lot in my 20s. And I was always so frustrated because he seemed to put in what I considered to be minimal effort with his food and the gym. Like, he would eat healthy food, he would go to the gym regularly, but it didn't take up his entire life. And that frustrated me because at that point in my own journey, food and the gym and what I was putting myself through was everything. I didn't realize at the time that that was the problem. With my
Mhm.
friend, he had a life where his self-worth, how he thought of himself, his life in general was propped up by several different areas, by relationships, by cultivating a good environment in his workplace, by, having good friendships, having a good time. So, on any given day, if something with food or his training or whatever didn't go maybe exactly as he was planning, there were all these other areas that he felt really fulfilled and felt a high degree of self-worth with that would carry him through those days. And therefore, his emotional journey was a lot more stable than mine. And in turn, his decisions were a lot more stable than mine. Me, on the other hand, if I didn't like how I looked in the mirror one morning, or if I didn't have as much energy at the gym as I thought I should have, or if one of my food choices went slightly sideways, all of a sudden my entire sense of self, my entire emotional well-being would crumble because that was all I had going on. And that would then compound and spread out into more self-destructive choices, more self-limiting choices that would then in turn make me feel worse. So, this idea of not hyper focusing on things like food and exercise, actually investing energy in other areas of our lives, sometimes that might mean some personal development work or whatever that we do is in the field of like communication or something like that to facilitate better relationships and more fulfillment in that area. It's not work that's being done directly on food and exercise, but it has a hugely positive impact on what happens with food and exercise because it means that our sense of self and our emotions are just more stable and more emotional stability, more sense of fulfillment. It just leads to better choices.
Mhm. Yeah, that's such a good point. And it just also helps. Like, I talk a lot about habits and how we get in these patterns. And when we get into patterns of overexercise on obsessing about food, our brain just starts to think we need it. And it wakes up every day and it's like, okay, I need to work out, restrict my food. Like, it's just all becomes very habitual and compulsive. But when you start to expand your field of vision just for your life in general, those pathways start to change because you show your brain like, hey, this is not the most important thing in my life. And you really start to train yourself that, you don't need to be practicing those destructive behaviors over and over. And then the desire for those destructive behaviors goes away. So, yeah, I love the way you're talking about it in terms of emotions, but it's also super helpful in terms of just deconditioning the destructive habits in general.
Yeah, because like we do need things to pull us away, like from
Hmm.
those habits, because that pull towards certain well-established pathways is real. Like
Yeah.
we do a certain thing, and you speak really well to this point. Like we do a certain thing for a certain period of time, we're going to experience a pull towards that thing, regardless of whether it's good for us or not. So
Yeah.
if we don't have other areas of our lives that are fulfilling and kind of well built out to provide an anchor for our attention in other areas, we're just gonna it's gonna be very hard not to drift back to those old pathways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think exercise is such a good example. You talked about how it became the center of your life, right? It was like the
Mm.
most important thing. And that's kind of what your brain learns. And I remember like when I stopped compulsively exercising, there was definitely this pull. Like I felt like, oh my gosh, like I'm a failure today. And if I don't do this, and there was sort of this buzzing in my body and brain, like I need to do this, I need to do this. But the more days you get through, and just exercise in a healthier way and redirect your attention, that just goes away. And then you're like, wow, I can't believe I ever thought I needed to hurt myself like that. But it's just something you have to get through. It's almost a little bit of a withdrawal. And I'm sure there's a neurochemical, biological explanation for that as well.
Yeah, a really interesting explanation for that I heard recently. I was talking with you may have seen her on Instagram, Dr. Andrea Love. She talks,
Yeah.
yeah, she talks a lot about, kind of a lot of myth busting, a lot of debunking of misrepresented information and that kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
we were talking about how when we essentially separate ourselves from something that has historically been some form of coping strategy, it's not necessarily that we have like a chemical dependence on that coping strategy, but often more that we've just removed this coping strategy from our lives. Like all of a sudden, we might be left kind of face to face with more emotion that we previously may have just been a bit shielded from. We're going to be maybe spending a little bit more time in the company of our own thoughts without the distraction. And that creates a situation where it's kind of normal to feel a bit dysregulated. We're
Mhm.
going to be facing a little bit of discomfort. We're going to be experiencing a little bit of dysregulation, but that doesn't mean that what you're doing is necessarily wrong.
Mhm.
Something I often tell people is like, to find that difference, we need to work on finding the difference between what things like exercise, for example, we're doing through the lens of this is an active choice in the name of a positive outcome holistically that I'm aiming for versus what am I doing to just appease a compulsion. Like
Mhm.
what I want to do with exercise, am I doing it because it's a mindful choice that's part of a balanced plan? Or am I doing it because I feel a compulsion to do it in the name
Mhm.
of managing a difficult feeling, or because I'm afraid of how I'm going to feel if I don't do it?
Mhm.
And it's a nuanced topic, but yeah, if we move away from the things that we have been doing through the lens of compulsion, yeah, we're going to experience some dysregulation and some
Yeah.
challenging moments, but that doesn't mean that we've taken a wrong turn.
Yeah, I think it's an indication that you're on the right track, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be some discomfort in the name of habit change, in the name of not following those compulsive behaviors. And just realizing that it's temporary, realizing that this uncomfortable feeling you have of not going to the gym for hours, like it's going to pass. You're going to eventually settle into a place where you feel good with normal amounts of exercise. And also, like having a little urge to exercise in a healthy way is not a bad thing. Like, once we learn to exercise in healthy ways that are sustainable and realistic, you're gonna have that same, like I talked about, that little buzzing feeling of like, "Oh, I wanna do this," but it's a good thing. Like, when we
Yeah,
train good habits, we get those urges for the good habits, and that's a great sign.
for sure. Still to this day, like some of the best explanations that I ever heard of navigating that pathway change came from Brain Over Binge. Like it was you, like you were one of the first people that introduced me to that idea, like when Brain Over Binge first came out and I started reading. So, I got to high five you and thank you for that one because this
Thank
this
you.
whole concept of like, yeah, this is a well-established pathway. We have to do something different. It's going to feel a bit weird for a moment, but that's okay. Like your explanations of that in the Brain Over Binge work have been incredible.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it's been helpful to you, and, yeah, I just think it can provide a framework where we don't have to think something is wrong with us. We don't have to make it
Yeah.
so deep and meaningful. It's like, "Oh, this is just what I've always done, so of course my brain is going to try to encourage me to do this, but it doesn't mean I have to, because I have that agency within myself to make a different choice."
Hmm. I think a friend of mine told me earlier in the year, we were working on some things that I was doing with I think involving some social media stuff, and I was running some in-person workshops, and it was really scary for me to actually step away from social media and invest some energy in putting together some like in-person workshops because only so much energy can go around. I have my clients that I work with one-to-one, and then there's the time outside of that that's needs to be split between whatever needs to be done. And taking that energy that I would have historically put into creating social media content, podcasts, YouTube, all that kind of thing, it was scary because all of a sudden I was investing energy in a different area. And I wasn't totally transparent with him about how I was feeling at first. And I was like, okay, so we've decided that I'm running some workshops. This is what I need to do. Okay, cool. But on the inside, I'm just like simmering, just like so uncomfortable. And one of the
Yeah.
most helpful things that he ever told me was like, it's normal that what you're feeling right now is a bit scary. Like, that's normal. Like, you're doing something different right now. We're investing energy in a different area. We're doing a different thing. This is kind of unknown territory. If you weren't a bit scared, it would be weird. So the fact that you're a bit scared right now, the fact that you're a bit nervous right now, the fact that this is hard, that's normal and it's a kind of a good sign.
Yeah, I really love that example. It's such a concrete example of you decided to make a change. You decided to invest some energy in an area that was important to you. Therefore, you had to make a choice to put some other things aside. And that may be a place that people are coming to as we approach the new year. I want to
Yeah.
invest some energy in this area of my life. And what they've always done will still pull them, right? That's just how we operate. They're going to feel pulled toward those old habits and patterns, but it's like just keep redirecting. That's all you have to do is keep redirecting and reminding yourself why this new goal is important to you. And then make sure your goals are realistic, sustainable, healthy, not compulsive or obsessive or destructive. If you look inward and really get in touch with that higher version of yourself, you're going to see like what goals are really in line with who you want to be and what goals are really pulling you in the wrong direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Yeah, any final thoughts on the approaching the new year in a healthy way?
I put together a little cheat sheet over here to
Okay.
make sure that I didn't forget anything important. And there are a couple of things that, we've covered a lot of really important stuff, but one of them that I would really love to leave everyone with is that on a very, very practical level, treat rest and recovery with the same respect that you would treat diet and exercise. From the bottom of my heart, after 15 years in the fitness industry, even longer as a coach, 10 years working in commercial gyms, this is something that I see or have seen for like almost 2 decades. All this emphasis placed on eat the right food, exercise really hard, but not nearly enough emphasis placed on rest and recovery. And I know some people are starting to talk a bit more about sleep. I know sleep is becoming a bit of a buzzword and it's a bit more important. But if we look at the different forms of stress that we go through or might experience on a day-to-day basis, there's emotional, psychological, existential, physical, environmental, social, systemic, all these different kinds of stress that we experience. And if we're not treating rest and recovery with the same respect that we're treating things like diet and exercise, we're going to burn out. So that would be something that on a very, very practical level, a sleep routine is so important. It goes without saying. I know a lot of people are saying that though. So, forgive the boring advice there, but just any form of rest and recovery just as important as diet and exercise because stress plus recovery equals growth. Most of us are getting enough stress. We're very, very good at accumulating stress and finding new ways to stress ourselves, even if that stress is in the name of exercise, which is still a stress. It's a stressor on the body. It's a stress that's associated with, usually positive outcomes, but it's a stressor, none the same. It's a physiological stressor. So, stress plus recovery equals growth. Remember the recovery part.
I think that's a really great point to end on because there's so much around the new year about push, push, push. You just need to go faster, harder, stronger, and just to step back and realize rest and recovery are so important. And then getting back to eating disorder recovery and binge eating recovery, like that has to be the priority as well.
Mm,
Like regardless of what your other goals may be, stopping the binging, stopping the restricting is like top of the pile.
100%. And anything that we do that is kind of built on a foundation of binge eating and restricting is very much a house built on sand. We have to make sure that those things are fundamentally being addressed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation. It's been really, really helpful.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathryn. It's always really awesome to catch up with you.
Yeah. Thanks, Marcus.